Hello, my friend. Today I will tell you another long-forgotten legend. Close your eyes and let the magic transport you to Middle-earth. Our journey begins. The stars of Middle-earth stretched vast and silver-bright above the land that would soon be no more. Their light trembled upon the waves of the western sea, where the slow tides lapped at the broken shores of Bond. The world was quiet here, yet it was a silence filled with memory, a silence that held echoes of lost voices, of songs sung in halls now buried beneath the sea, and of oath still whispered upon the wind. Was worn, frayed by long roads, and was worn, frayed by long roads and restless wandering. His boots bore the dust of countless paths, and his hands, calloused strong, spoke of years spent in craft. Yet now they carried only a single token of the past, a ring, thin and unadorned, the last gift of his kin before the hidden city felt a ruin. The night wind carried the salt of the sea, and the scent of earth long turned to dust. Arden stood upon the cliffs where once a great forest had stretched, where Dorth had stood, realm of Thingol and Melan. The trees were gone, the halls empty, and the song of the nightingales had long since faded into shadow. But still the sea whispered, and in that whisper Aranon heard it again, the voice that had haunted him in dreams. Seek the light that lingers, seek the gleam of the Sarrow. The words were no longer a whisper in the night. They rang in his mind like a bell tolling across forgotten years, carrying the weight of fate upon their breath. He knew not whose voice it was. He knew only that it called him ever westward, beyond the lands he had known, beyond the ruins of elven halls and the bones of forgotten wars. For in the depths of the earth, beneath rock and water, beneath time itself, a Silmaril yet gleamed. The weight of memory as he stood upon the cliffs, watching the tide stir below. Aranon thought of the great jewels, the works of Fëanor, which had been the pride and doom of the elves. He had never seen them, not with his own eyes, yet he had seen their aftermath. He had seen Maedhros, eldest of Fëanor's sons, in the days when the oath still burned like fire in his heart. He had seen Maedhros standing upon the shores of Sion, his song filled with sorrow, even as his hands were stained with the deeds that could not be undone. He had seen the ruin of Dorth, the fall of the havens, the last grief of Elwing as she cast herself into the wave. And now all was lost. But not all. Something remained. The light of the Silmarils had not been extinguished. One gleamed upon the brow of Endel as he sailed the heavens beyond reach of the world. One had been swallowed into the very heart of the earth, hidden forever from eyes that would seek it. And the last had been claimed by the sea. It was that one that Aranon sought, not for himself, not for greed, but because something, someone, had called him to it, and he could not turn away. A meeting on the cliffs. Even now you follow the whisper of jewels long lost. The voice broke the hush of the night, deep and edged with something unreadable. Aaron turned, his hand instinctively falling to the hilt of the dagger at his side, though he did not yet draw it. The figure that had spoken stood at the edge of the cliff, a shadow against the stars, tall and unmoving. The moonlight caught the stranger's face, and in that moment, recognition struck like a blade. Midas? But how? Aaron had thought the son of Fëanor lost. He had heard the tales, The whispers that Maedhros and Maglor had vanished after the taking of the last Silmarils. The cursed gems that had burned them as punishment for their deeds. Some said Maedhros had been consumed by the fire of the earth itself, swallowed by the doom he had helped shape. Yet here he stood. Or perhaps this was but a shade, a lingering ghost, bound to the land where the past had not yet faded. Aranon did not speak. He only watched, his heart heavy with questions he did not yet dare to ask. Maedhros stepped forward, the silver threads in his dark hair catching the light. His face was lined with the weight of years beyond counting, and his eyes, those eyes, held a depth that no living soul should have borne. "You seek the Silal of the sea," Maedhros said at last, "and yet you do not know what you would do should you find it." Aaron did not answer. He did not need to. The silence between them stretched long, heavy with the unspoken burdens of an age now past. And then Maedhros laughed low, bitter, a sound that did not belong to joy. "You are not the first to search," he said, "and you will not be the last. The sea does not give up its treasures easily, nor does fate bend to the will of those who seek to mend what has been broken." Aranon hesitated, but at last he found his voice. "I do not seek to mend the past. I only seek to understand it." Maedhros' gaze was sharp, as if searching for something in Aaron's words. For a moment he did not respond, but then slowly he nodded. "Then come," he said. "If you would chase the echoes of a lost age, you will not do so alone." And with that he turned, walking toward the edge of the cliffs, toward the place where the land met the restless tide. Aranon followed. A journey begins. Beneath them, the waves moved in the darkness, turning the reflection of the stars into broken shards of light. The tide pulled at the land like a restless dream, as if something beneath the waters called to them in return. And so they walked, one who had known the fire of the Silmarils, and one who had only ever glimpsed their shadow. The night stretched before them, endless and full of quiet things unseen. But the whisper of the sea did not fade, and somewhere far beneath the waves, a Silmaril still gleamed. The night stretched vast and boundless above them, its endless vaults scattered with the light of cold, ancient stars. The wind, restless and wandering, swept across the cliffs, carrying with it the scent of the sea, briny and deep, with the taste of something older than time, something lost and yet unforgotten. The waves below moved with slow, deliberate power, carving the land as they had for ages beyond reckoning, whispering secrets in the language of foam and spray. Each breath of wind was like a sigh from the depths of the world, laden with memory, with longing, with the ghosts of things once bright and now faded into twilight. Maedhros stood upon the edge of the precipice, motionless save for the shifting of his long cloak which billowed against the wind like a banner of shadow. His figure, tall and worn, seemed sculpted from the stone itself, carved by suffering, honed by an unyielding fire that still smoldered beneath the weight of years. His red hair, now touched with silver as though frost had settled upon the embers, stirred in the salt-laden gusts. But as his face remained still, his gaze fixed upon the dark horizon where the sky met the restless tide, Aranon stood a pace behind him, feeling the weight of the moment press upon his spirit like the hush before a storm. He studied the elder elf's profile, the sharp, almost severe lines of his face, the solemnity in his bearing that spoke of burdens few could comprehend. And yet beneath the unyielding exterior, beneath the armor of time and loss, there was something else, something deeper, more elusive, a sorrow too vast to be named, a wound so deep it had ceased to bleed and instead had turned to stone within him. The silence stretched between them, long and unbroken, until at last Maedhros spoke. His voice was quiet, but within it lay the weight of ages, the echo of a world that had burned and crumbled beneath the feet of those who had sworn an oath they could never escape. "You follow the voice of the sea," he murmured, his words slow, deliberate, as if each syllable carried the burden of thought long pondered and never spoken aloud. "But tell me, Smith of Gondolin, do you truly understand what it is that calls you? Do you know what it is you seek?" Einon hesitated, for he did not wish to answer with haste. He let the question settle within him, let it unfurl like a tide drawing back to reveal the shape of the shore beneath. He had chased this whisper, this dream, across lands now turned to ruin, through paths where the footprints of the past had long since faded into dust. But to say he truly understood, to say he knew what it was he sought, that would be a lie, and he would not shame himself with falsehood before a son of Fëanor, before one who had lived through the making and unmaking of legends. At last he breathed in deeply, feeling the salt sting his throat, tasting the memory of forgot-gotten lands upon his tongue. "I seek the Silmaril," he said, his voice steady but low, "not because I would claim it, nor because I wish to wield its light. I do not covet it, nor do I dream of possessing what was not made for my hands. But there is something in the marrow of my bones, something I cannot name that draws me to its resting place. A voice that does not belong to me, a song I have never heard before. And yet," he exhaled, his breath mingling with the mist rising from the waves below, "and yet it is familiar, as if it has always been waiting for me to listen." Maedhros did not move, but his gaze shifted, sharp as a blade of elven steel. For a long moment he said nothing, only studying Aranon with an intensity that felt like the weight of a judgment long withheld. And when he finally spoke, his voice was softer, though no less heavy with meaning. "The Silmaril are not mere jewels," he said, and there was something in his tone, something distant, something that trembled beneath the surface of his carefully measured words. "They are not treasures to be sought, nor prizes to be won. They are light incarnate, the very essence of what was pure before the world was marred by darkness. And yet they are also fire, and fire does not grant peace to those who touch it." His gaze drifted toward the sea, and his lone hand, tightened at his side as if some old pain had stirred in his flesh. "I have seen what they bring to those who seek them. I have seen the brightest hearts crumble beneath their weight, seen love turn to ash, seen kingdoms fall like leaves upon the wind. And still, after all this time, they burned." The wind howled, rushing past them like the voices of the past, and for a long moment neither spoke. The waves below churned white foam, crashing against the jagged rocks as if the sea itself was restless, as if it too remembered. And then Maedhros turned his gaze, no longer distant, but locked on Aranon with something unreadable in his eyes. "If you find it," he asked, his voice quieter now, almost introspective, "what will you do? If the Silmaril lies beneath the waters, waiting for your hand, will you take it? Will you risk the fire? Aranon felt the question settled within him, heavier than the mail he had once forged, heavier than the years of wandering that had led him here. He looked down at his hands that had once shaped blades for warriors of Gondolin, hands that had worked silver and steel into beauty, hands that had borne the weight of swords and shields and had never before faltered. And yet the thought of touching the light of Fëanor's greatest creation. "I do not know," he admitted at last, his voice almost a whisper. "I would like to believe that I could let it be, that I could look upon it and leave it where it rests. But who am I to say what I will do when I have not yet stood before it?" Mos gave a small, bitter smile, and it was a strange thing to see upon his face, a flicker of something that might once have been weariness, or wisdom, or regret. "You are wise," he murmured, "wiser than many who have sought the Silmarils before you. Perhaps that is why the sea calls you." He turned once more, his gaze sweeping over the darkened waters below. "Come then," he said. "Let us go with the way waves will take us. Let us see what fate has woven into the tide." Aranon nodded, feeling the wind press against his back as if urging him forward. And as they descended the cliffs toward the waiting shore, the sea whispered once more. The Silmaril gleamed in the depths, waiting, and the world watched. The cliffs sloped downward in jagged terraces, each level carved by the slow, tireless hands of time and tide. The rock was dark and worn smooth in places, gleaming faintly beneath the one starlight, while elsewhere it was fractured and sharp, its edges speaking of lands once whole, now broken. The sea stretched vast before them, its surface shifting restlessly, a mirror shattered into 1,000 moving fragments of silver and ink. The waves came in long, unhurried swells, as if the ocean itself had settled into a deep and thoughtful breathing, drawing forth secrets from the depths and exhaling them into the night air. The scent of salt lay thick upon the wind, mingling with something deeper, something old, as though the very bones of the world were exposed here at the rim of Middle-earth, where land met the endless unknown. They descended in silence, Maedhros leading, his pace steady and measured, Aranon on following. Each step taken with the caution of one who knew that the ground beneath his feet was not merely stone, but the remnants of an age long past. Every crack in the rock seemed to whisper. Every gust of wind carried the voice of something lost, something waiting. And always beneath the ever-moving surface of the sea, there was the glimmer of something unseen, a gleam that was not moonlight nor starlight, but something older, something living. At last they reached the shoreline where the cliffs gave way to a long expanse of black sand, smooth and fine as sifted ash. Here the waves lapped with a quiet, measured rhythm, leaving behind mirrored trails of water that caught the light for a brief moment before fading into the vast darkness of the shore. Driftwood lay scattered along the tide line, tangled with seaweed that clung like fingers grasping at the remnants of the pass. Maedhros stood at the water's edge, gazing out toward the dark horizon, his cloak stirring against the night air, his posture unmoving, as though he were carved from the very rock of bond itself. His one hand hung loose at his side, but there was tension in the fingers, a tightness in the set of his shoulders, a restraint that seemed almost unnatural, as if some great force within him struggled against the weight of 1,000 unspoken thoughts. At last he spoke, his voice low and measured, yet filled with something deeper than mere words could contain. "The sea does not forget," he murmured, more to himself than to Aranon, though the younger elf listened as though the wind itself had fallen silent to let these words take shape. "It does not remember as we do, in stories told and retold, in griefs written upon the heart and carried through the years. It remembers differently. It carries what is lost, takes what is given, but never returns unchanged. What it holds forever." He fell quiet for a moment, then exhaled, slow and deliberate. "Even light drowns in its depths." Aranon stepped closer, his boots pressing into the damp sand, the grains shifting subtly beneath his weight. "And yet," he said after a long pause, his voice thoughtful, "light is not so easily extinguished. A flame can be buried beneath earth and stone, but if even the smallest ember remains, it may yet be kindled anew. Perhaps the sea does not forget, because it is not meant to. Perhaps it holds not only what is lost, but what must one day be found." Maedhros turned slightly, his gaze sharp, assessing, searching for something in Aaron's face, some measure of understanding that went beyond mere words. Then, with a faint, weary smile, one that barely curved his lips but lingered in his eyes like the memory of distant fire, he inclined his head. "You speak as one who has not yet seen the fire consume," he said, "as one who believes in the mercy of fate." He looked out over the water again, his expression unreadable. "Tell me, Smith of Gondolin, do you truly believe that the past can be redeemed? That what was lost may yet be restored?" Pignon hesitated. It was not an easy question, nor one to be answered lightly. He had seen too much, walked through the ruins of too many great halls, traced his fingers over walls that still bore the marks of desperate battle, of blood spilled and hopes shattered. He had seen the ghosts of fallen kings in the broken stones of Aranon, heard the echoes of lost songs in the silence of Dorth. He had carried the weight of history upon his back like a cloak woven from sorrow and dust. And yet something remained. Perhaps it was foolishness. Perhaps it was nothing more than the stubborn hope of one who had seen too much ruin and refused to believe that ruin was all there was. But he had always believed that nothing was truly gone, not if it still lingered in the hearts of those who remembered. And the Serral still gleamed, hidden though it was beneath the weight of the sea. Could light endure even when buried beneath the waves? Could it, after all this time, still be waiting? "I do not know if the past can be undone," he admitted, his voice quiet, thoughtful, shaped by the weight of his own uncertainty. "And I do not know if redemption is something that can be taken, or if it must be given, like a gift freely offered. But I do know this: if the Serral still shines beneath the water, if its light has not been extinguished, then there is still something left of the fire that once was. And if it remains, then perhaps not all is lost." Maedhros was silent for a long time. The waves whispered against the shore, the stars shimmered in the dark vault of the sky, and the wind moved around them like the breath of something unseen. Then at last he turned, his gaze resting fully upon Aranon, and in his eyes there was something that had not been there before. Not hope, not exactly, but something close, a recognition, an understanding, a memory of what it had once been to believe. "Come," he said at last. "If the past still lingers, if there is yet light beneath the sea, then we shall find it." And as they stepped forward, the tide pulled back as if drawing a path before them. The journey had begun. The sea stretched before them, dark and restless, an expanse without end, its surface shifting beneath the breath of the night wind. The moonlight fell, and slanted silver beams catching upon the waves and casting them in shifting layers of pale luminescence and fathomless black. A tide murmured ceaselessly, its voice ancient and unyielding, whispering of things lost beneath its ever-turning depths, of kingdoms swallowed by time, of jewels that still gleamed in the abyss where no hand could reach. And yet, standing upon the edge of that boundless expanse where the land met the unknowable, the two figures who gazed into its shimmering heart were not mere travelers seeking relics of the past, but something more. Something suspended between memory and fate, between fire and water, between what had been and what might yet be. Maedhros did not speak for some time. His gaze, steady and unwavering, was fixed upon the horizon, though whether he was looking upon the path ahead or staring through the veil of years that lay behind him, Aranon could not tell. The son of Fëanor stood with the stillness of one who has spent long years weighed beneath the burden of unbroken thought. And there was a gravity in his silence, a quiet that was not emptiness, but the echo of something vast, something that had once burned too brightly and had since turned to embers. His lone hand curled slightly at his side, fingers tightening, then relaxing, as though they sought to grasp something unseen, something that had long since slipped beyond reach. At last his voice came, low and deliberate, each word carrying the weight of time and sorrow. And though he spoke softly, the sea itself seemed to hush for him, as if even the waves bent to listen. "Do you know what it means to hold fire in your hands, Aranon?" he asked, not turning his gaze from the water, his tone neither accusing nor expectant, but merely reflective, as though the question was one he had asked himself many times before. Not the fire of the forge, not the flame that yields to the will of its maker and bends to purpose, but something greater, something beyond mastery. A fire that is not meant to be controlled, nor possessed, nor shaped, but that simply is. A fire that is its own law, its own purpose, its own doom. Aranon hesitated, not because he lacked an answer, but because he knew instinctively that the question was not meant to be answered easily, nor with mere words. He had held fire before in his own way, had shaped it upon the anvils of Gondolin, had watched it dance upon molten metal, had felt its warmth flickering upon his skin as he worked. But that was not what Maedhros spoke of. The fire of the Silmarils was something else entirely, something pure, something that neither obeyed nor yielded, something that burned not because it was commanded to, but because it could do nothing else. It was light that could not be dimmed, a radiance that knew neither mercy nor restraint. And to hold such fire, to seek it, he exhaled, his breath mingling with the salt air, and when he spoke his voice was measured, careful, but not uncertain. "I do not know if any can truly understand such fire unless they have held it," he said at last, his words slow, not because he doubted them, but because he wished to give them their due weight. "And perhaps not even then. But I know that fire is neither good nor evil. It simply is. It is creation and destruction, warmth and ruin, a gift and a curse. And those who reach for it must know that it does not grant its light freely. The question is not whether it can be held, but whether one is willing to bear the cost of doing so. Maedhros turned his head slightly, his gaze flickering toward Aranon. Something unreadable in his eyes, something that might have been curiosity, or perhaps recognition. There was a long pause before he spoke again, and when he did, there was something almost distant in his voice, as though he were recalling words spoken long ago, words that still lingered unforgotten. "There was a time when I would have called that wisdom," he murmured, and there was a flicker of something, perhaps amusement, perhaps sorrow, in his tone. "A time when I might have believed that such thoughts could temper the fire, that understanding the nature of the flame might shield one from its price." He let out a quiet breath, his gaze returning to the sea. "But I have learned that knowing the cost does not lessen it. The Silmarils do not burn because they choose to. They burn because they cannot do otherwise. And those who touch them do not escape untouched." Aranon watched him for a long moment, noting the slight tension in his posture, the way his shoulders carried a weight that could not be seen. The way his hand, though, still seemed to remember the grasp of something that had once burned too bright for any mortal or immortal hand to bear. He had heard the stories, of course. All of Middle-earth knew them. He had heard of how the sons of Fëanor had sworn the oath that had bound them to ruin, how they had pursued the Silmarils to the ends of the world, how in the end they had found them only to suffer for their claiming. He knew of how the gems had rejected their hands, searing them, turning their touch away as though even their light could not bear the weight of so much blood. And yet to stand beside Maedhros now, to hear his words not as legend, but as truth spoken by one who had lived it, was something else entirely. For a long moment, neither spoke. The wind stirred the sand in ghostly spirals, the sea whispered against the shore, and above them the stars gleamed cold and distant, their light untouched by the sorrow of the world below. Then Maedhros moved, stepping toward the water, his boots sinking slightly into the wet sand as the tide washed over them, soaking the hem of his cloak. He stood there for a moment, letting the sea move around him as though listening, as though waiting. "If it is still there," he said at last, his voice barely more than a murmur, "if the Silmaril still lies beneath the waves untouched, unclaimed, then perhaps it is because it wishes to remain so." His lone hand curled slightly at his side, then stilled. "Perhaps it does not wish to be found." Aranon took a slow step forward, feeling the chill of the tide reach his own feet, feeling the pull of the water against him, the soft resistance of the world that had never belonged to him. "Then why does it still call?" he asked, his voice quiet but steady. "Why does the sea whisper of it, if it wishes only to be forgotten?" Maedhros was silent for a long time, and when he turned to look at Aranon again, there was something in his eyes that was neither answer nor certainty, but something deeper, something that could not be put into words. "Because fire does not die," he said at last, his voice like the shadow of a memory, a thought that had long haunted him. "And light does not fade, even in the depths of the sea." The waves moved around them, the wind curled between them, and beneath the vast, unbroken expanse of the night sky, the journey into the unknown began. The sea stretched vast and formless before them, a great expanse of shifting silver and endless shadow, its surface stirred by unseen hands that shaped the restless tide. The wind, cold and insistent, whispered across the water, carrying with it the salt, heavy breath of distant lands, of forgotten shores where time had ceased its turning. The waves lapped at the shore with quiet, deliberate patience, as though they had all the ages of the world to wait, as though they knew that sooner or later all things would come to them, drawn by the inevitable pull of the depths. And standing upon the threshold of that vast and boundless expanse, Maedhros and Aranon seemed small, their figures dark against the moonlit sand, like two shadows waiting upon the edge of some great design. Figures not yet written into the fabric of fate, but standing close enough to feel its breath. The silence between them was heavy, not with hesitation, but with thought, with the weight of unspoken words that had not yet found their form. And beneath it all, beneath the hush of wind and water, there was another sound, a whisper faint as a memory, distant as the light of the stars above them. The whisper of the Serral, the echo of something that had never truly been lost. Maedhros stood with the tide washing over his boots, the water rising and retreating like a living thing, cold against the warmth of his skin, as if the sea itself sought to draw him inward, to pull him into its quiet embrace. His expression was unreadable, but in his eyes there was something ancient, something that had looked too long into the abyss and had found in it a reflection of itself. The weight of centuries lay upon his shoulders, though he bore it without complaint, as if he had long since accepted that it could not be set down. And yet, as he gazed out upon the restless water, as he listened to the quiet voice that called from beneath the waves, there was something else, something almost like recognition, like the ghost of an old certainty long since abandoned. At last he spoke, his voice quiet but rich with meaning, with thought that had been shaped by long years of reflection. "Do you know what it is to be bound to something, Aranon?" he asked, his words slow, deliberate, each one carrying the weight of old wounds, of promises that could not be undone. Not by choice, nor by will, nor by any desire of your own, but by something greater, something deeper than flesh or thought. To be tied to a thing, not because you love it, not because you wish for it, but because it has been written upon the very fabric of your being. And to sever it would be to sever yourself. To feel its presence in every step, in every breath. To know that even if you turn away, even if you close your eyes and try to forget, it will remain waiting, unyielding, forever calling you back to it. He exhaled, slow, steady, his gaze fixed upon the horizon. That is what it is to be bound to the Silmarils. That is what it is to bear the weight of my father's fire. Aranon did not answer immediately, for the words were not ones to be met with haste. He let them settle within him, let them stir through the chambers of his mind, through the quiet places of his heart where his own doubts and convictions lay entwined. He had known longing before, had felt the pull of the unknown, the whisper of things unseen. He had walked the ruins of Gondolin with the ghosts of memory pressing close at his side, had traced his fingers over the cold stone of fallen halls and wondered if the past had truly been buried or if it still lingered, waiting to be found. But what Maedhros spoke of was something else entirely, something not of longing, but of bondage, of a fire that could not be extinguished no matter how deeply it was buried. At last he breathed in deeply, tasting the salt upon the air, feeling the cool bite of the wind against his skin. "I do not think I can claim to understand such a thing," he admitted, his voice quiet but steady, each word carefully chosen. "Not as you do, not as one who has lived beneath its shadow. But I have seen something of it. I have seen what it leaves behind." He turned his gaze toward Maedhros then, meeting the elder elf's eyes with an honesty that held no presumption, only understanding. "I have seen it in the halls that no longer stand, in the songs that are no longer sung. I have seen it in the faces of those who have lost and who cannot let go, in the way they carry their past as though it is a thing that lives inside them, shaping their every thought, their every step. I have seen it in you." For a moment, Maedhros said nothing. Then, slowly, a faint smile ghosted the edge of his lips, a thing so small it might have been mistaken for nothing at all. But in his eyes there was something that flickered like an ember long thought extinguished. "You see much," he said, and there was no mockery in his tone, only quiet acknowledgement. "Perhaps more than you should." His gaze drifted back to the water, and his expression shifted, thoughtful, distant, as though he were looking not at the waves, but at something far beyond them. "The Silmarils do not choose," he said, his voice barely above a murmur. "They do not call because they wish to be found. They do not burn because they seek to harm. They simply are. And those who come to them do so not because they are worthy, not because they are meant to, but because they cannot do otherwise." Aranon watched him for a long moment, then turned his gaze to the sea, to the endless black and silver that stretched before them. "Then why do we stand here?" he asked, and his voice was neither challenge nor doubt, but simple curiosity, simple reflection. "If the Silmaril does not chew, if it does not call, then why does the sea still whisper of it? Why does its light still gleam beneath the wave?" He paused, letting the question linger in the air, letting it drift like the wind upon the tide. "Perhaps it is not the Silmaril that calls," he said at last. "Perhaps it is something else, something within us." Maedhros was silent, and when he spoke his voice was soft than before, quieter but no less sure. "Perhaps," he said. Then, after a long pause, he took a step forward into the water, into the dark, restless embrace of the tide. "Come," he said without turning back. "If the sea holds the answers, then let us go and find them." And as Aranon followed him into the waves, into the unknown, the wind whispered once more, and the stars above them burned bright and unyielding, their light undimmed by the passing of years. The Silmaril gleamed in the depths, and the sea did not forget. The water clung to them, cold and weighty, not merely a presence, but a force, something vast and ancient pressing against their body, enveloping them as they waited, deeper. The tide swirled around their legs, thick with unseen currents, as though the sea itself breathed, inhaling and exhaling with a slow, patient rhythm that had no need for haste. Above, the stars remained fixed in their silent watch, the silver face of the moon casting its light in long, shimmering paths across the shift waves. Yet even that light seemed hesitant here, hesitant to reach beyond the surface, hesitant to pierce the fathoms below, where darkness ruled, where time had long since unraveled into silence and weightless ruin. Ronan felt it as soon as the water reached his waist, a strange, humming stillness beneath the sound of the waves, a pause in the breath of the world as though something just beyond the grasp of sight had stirred, something that had lain undisturbed for an age and had now turned ever so slightly toward them. The salt clung to his lips, his skin prickled with the chill of the deep, but he did not falter, though his breath came slower, heavier, as if his very presence here was an intrusion, as if the sea had not yet decided whether to allow him passage or to claim him for its own. Maedhros ahead of him moved with a certainty that seemed unnatural, though whether it was the certainty of purpose or of resignation, Aranon could not yet tell. The water lapped against the hem of his cloak, dragging it outward in long, flowing ribbons, and his lone hand was clenched at his side as though he fought against something unseen, something that pressed upon him as surely as the tide. He had said little since stepping into the water, his gaze fixed always forward, his movements deliberate, methodical, as if following a path that only he could see, a path that had long ago been set in motion and could not now be turned aside. At last, when the sea had risen to their chests, he spoke, though he did not turn. His voice was lower now, quiet in a way that was not meant to be unheard, but that carried the weight of reflection, of something that had been carried for too long in silence. "The Silmarils were never meant for this world," he said, his words slow, careful, as though shaping them from something fragile, something that might shatter if given form too quickly. "They were made from the light of a place that does not belong to the land we walk, nor to the waters that claim it now. They are not of Middle-earth, nor even of the hands that wrought them, not truly. And yet we have spent our lives chasing them, seeking them as if they were ours to take, as if they were things that could be held in mortal grasp without consequence." He exhaled a breath that seemed to carry more than air, as if something unspoken had been loosed from within him. "But fire does not belong in the depths, and yet here we stand." Aranon hesitated, not because he did not know how to answer, but because he knew that his words would not be enough, not in the way that Maedhros needed them to be. And yet he could not leave the silence unfilled. "Perhaps that is the very reason it calls to us," he said, his voice quiet though steady, shaping his thoughts as he spoke, following them as one follows the current of an unknown river. "Because it does not belong here, because it is something that should not be lost, that should not be buried beneath the weight of time and water. Light does not surrender so easily to the dark. Perhaps it is not meant to." He looked toward Maedhros then, searching for something in his face, though it remained unreadable, carved by years beyond counting, by griefs too deep for speech. "And perhaps," he continued, "neither are we." Mos was still for a moment, and then slowly he turned his eyes, meeting Aranon, and in them was something that had not been there before. Not quite hope, nor yet belief, but something on the edge of both, something that stirred, faint and uncertain, beneath the weight of what had been lost. "You speak as one who has not yet known the full price of fire," he said, though there was no reproach in his tone, only quiet acknowledgement. "And perhaps that is why you are still able to speak of it so." The wind rose suddenly, a sharp gust that carried the scent of brine and the distant breath of unseen shores. And the waves surged against them, their rhythm breaking as though something beneath had shifted, as though the sea itself had heard and had answered in kind. The water swirled around their legs, restless, insistent, and for the first time Aranon felt it more keenly, the pull, the whisper, the subtle, inexorable calling from beneath, deeper than thought, deeper than words. The sorrow was there, not a thing of the past, not a memory, not a relic to be sought for glory or grief. It was there, real, waiting, still gleaming in the depths where it had fallen, its light unyielding even to the vast weight of the ocean. And yet there was something else, something more than the simple presence of a jewel. There was a presence, something within the water, something that did not speak, but that watched, that waited. A presence that had been there long before them, long before the wars that had shaped the world, long before even the Silmaril had been lost to the sea. And for the first time, Aaron wondered if the sea did not hold its own will, if it did not guard more than treasure, if it did not remember more than men and elves could fathom. If the Serral still burned beneath the waves, was it because it had not been forgotten? Or was it because it had been claimed? Math took another step forward, deeper now, the water rising to his shoulders, his breath slow and even, his body still as if he listened to something beyond the reach of sound. And then, without looking back, without hesitation, he spoke again, his voice barely above a whisper, yet filled with certainty. It does not call because it wishes to be found. It calls because it has never ceased burning. And if fire still lives in the deep, then we must ask whether it is ours to take, or whether it has become part of the sea itself. The tide surged around them, the waves pressing inward, and the light beneath the water flickered, not dimming but shifting as though something in the very bones of the sea had stirred. And in that moment, standing upon the edge of something vast and unseen, Aranon felt it fully. The weight of the past, the pull of the present, and the great and silent question that lay in the depths before them. Were they seeking the Silmaril, or had it been waiting for them? And as the wind howled around them, as the tide pressed against them, as the moon cast its pale and knowing gaze upon the restless waters, the sea did not answer. The sea did not need to. The water had swallowed them now, dragging them into its cold, endless embrace. A world without sky, without land, without time. The air that had filled their lungs was gone, surrendered to the deep. And in its place was silence, vast, absolute, pressing upon them as if the weight of the ocean itself was a voice that could not be heard, but only felt. The surface had vanished above them, lost to a slow, shifting veil of darkness and refracted light. The distant glow of the moon no longer their guide, only a memory, only something that belonged to another world. And still they descended. The sea wrapped itself around them, thick and unyielding, no longer merely water, but something heavier, something living, a thing with memory, with patience, with an eternity in which to wait. The pressure tightened, creeping against their bones, yet the sea did not crush them. It held them, watched them, tested them as though deciding whether they were meant to pass, whether they had the right to move through its realm. It did not fight them, but neither did it yield. It simply was. And they, for all their purpose, for all their will, were nothing but two figures sinking through its ancient breath, to wanderers stepping into a place where no feet should tread. Aranon felt his heartbeat slow, not from fear, but from something deeper, something heavier than even the weight of the water around him. This was no natural descent, no mere diving of flesh into the deep. The currents did not toss them as they should have, nor did the sea seek to drive them back to the surface as it would have any other creature of the land. It was guiding them, drawing them in. It was as though the sea itself had claimed this path, as though it had shaped the road beneath its waves not in stone or sand, but in movement, in depth, in silence. And they, whether by fate or folly, had become part of it. Ahead of him, Maedhros was still, his body unmoving save for the slow drift of his cloak, the strands of his hair curling and unfurling like the last traces of flame struggling against the dark. His expression was unreadable, his features distant, untouched by fear, untouched by haste, as though he had left behind the burden of breath, as though he had stepped beyond the limits of flesh and was now something else entirely. Yet his eyes burned like embers beneath the sea, and Aranon knew, even without words, that whatever waited for them in the depths, Maedhros had already seen it. Not with his eyes, but with something deeper, something that had never stopped looking, never stopped searching, even after all else had been lost. At last, when they had drifted so far that the world above seemed nothing more than a forgotten dream, Maedhros turned, his voice a thing that should not have been possible in the water, yet it reached Aranon as though carried upon the very currents that bore them downward. "Do you feel it?" he asked. And though the words were simple, they carried weight, a weight that settled into Araron's bones, pressing against his spirit more than against his flesh. "Do you feel the way the sea does not resist us? How it does not push us back, does not seek to drown us nor to consume us? How it only watches, only waits?" His gaze did not waver, but there was something behind his eyes, something that had not been there before, a flicker of understanding, of recognition, of something that had not yet taken shape, but had begun to stir. "We are not searching for it," he continued, his words slow, steady, shaped by long thought. "It is searching for us." Aranon did not answer at once, for he did not need to. He could feel it now, the pull, not as a force that dragged, not as an urging towards something that demanded to be found, but as a presence, unknowing, a thing that had waited patient and silent for the hands that would reach toward it. Not to take, not to claim, but to understand. And he wondered then if that had been the mistake of all those before, if the fire of the Silmarils had never been meant to be possessed, if it had never been a thing to be won or wielded, but a light to be beheld, a thing that did not belong to hands at all, but to those who were willing to see. The darkness deepened around them, but it was no longer empty. Shapes moved beyond the reach of sight, vast things that had never known the air above, creatures that did not fear the dark, but had been shaped by it, had become one with it. And yet they did not come near. They lingered only at the edges, watching, waiting, as though they too knew, as though they too understood that something more ancient than themselves lay ahead, something not of their world, something that did not belong even to the deep. Then at last the blackness began to shift, not dispersing, not breaking, but thinning, softening, as though the very nature of the water had begun to change, The current no longer pulled them downward. It guided them forward. And ahead, so distant yet so clear, there was a glow. It was not the glow of the moon, nor of starlight fractured by the waves above. It was something richer, something deeper, something unbroken by the press of the sea, by the weight of the ages that had sought to bury it. It was light, pure and burning light that did not flicker, did not tremble. It was there, waiting, resting upon the seabed as if it had never fallen, as if it had never been cast away in sorrow and grief. It did not gleam as a thing lost, nor as a thing forgotten. It gleamed because it could not do otherwise, because it did not know how to be anything else. And in that moment, Aranon understood what Maedhros had meant, understood what he had felt, what he had carried all these years. The Silmaril did not call because it wished to be found. It called because it had never ceased burning. And as they drifted closer, as the water parted to reveal its light in full, Aranon felt something shift within him, something vast and unshaped, something that had waited just as long as the Silmaril had, something that was not longing nor desire, nor even understanding, but the quiet, inescapable truth that once a thing is seen, it can never again be unseen. The sea held its breath, and the light did not fade. The water lay still around them, thick and heavy, as though the sea itself had ceased its endless motion, as though it had surrendered to the presence of the light, as though it had forgotten for this moment how to pull and push, how to rise and fall. The great currents that had carried them here had quieted, not with the exhaustion of spent force, but with something deeper, something like reverence. There was a hush in the deep, a silence that was not emptiness but fullness, an awareness, a waiting, as if all things beneath the sea, from the smallest unseen creatures to the vast and unknowable shapes that had drifted in the distance, were now watching, now listening, now bearing witness to what had come to pass. And at the heart of that hush, at the center of that stillness, the sorrow burned. It rested upon the seabed, nestled in a hollow of smooth, pale stone, as though the very earth of the ocean floor had shaped itself around it, had cradled it for all these long years, keeping it untouched, unclaimed. And though the darkness of the abyss surrounded it, though the endless weight of the sea pressed upon it, the light did not waver, did not bow, did not bend. It burned as it always had, as it always would, as it had burned in the crown of Morgoth, as it had burned in the hands of Beren and Luthien, as it had burned when it was cast into the sea. Not as something lost, but as something that could not be extinguished. And yet as they beheld it, as they stood within the reach of its radiance, it was not fire that filled them, not the heat of Fëanor's restless will, not the consuming hunger of the oath that had driven brother against brother, that had stained the hands of kings with the blood of kin. It was light, pure, unburdened, and in that light there was no demand, no promise, no call to be taken, or warning to be turned away. There was only being. The Silmaril was here as it had always been, and it had never needed to be found. It had simply waited. Maedhros did not move. His body was still held in the weightless hush of the sea, his cloak drifting slowly around him, his lone hand half curled at his side. Yet there was a tension in him, not in flesh, but in something deeper, something that had been bound for far too long, something that had known too much loss, too much grief, too much fire. His eyes fixed upon the Silmaril did not flicker, did not blink, did not shift from that gleaming light. But they were not filled with triumph, nor longing, nor even sorrow. There was only silence within them, the silence of something that has reached the moment upon which all else has turned and does not know what will follow. Aranon, watching him, said nothing. For the first time since they had begun this journey, since they had set foot upon the darkened shore, since they had followed the whisper of the sea into the deep, he did not know if there were any words to be spoken. He had thought once that this was a quest, that they were searching for something, that the Silmaril had called them because it wished to be taken, to be carried out of the abyss and returned to the world above. But now, as he stood before it, as he felt the hush of the deep settle around them like the paw between heartbeats, he realized the truth. It had never been about finding the Silmaril. It had been about standing here. It had been about this moment, this meeting, this reckoning between light and those who had sought it for so long that they had forgotten why. At last Maedhros exhaled, though no breath escaped his lips, for they were deep beneath the sea, where air had no place. Yet still it was a breath, the loosening of something ill held, the exhalation of a weight carried for centuries beyond counting. And then slowly, carefully, as though he did not yet know if the choice was his to make, he reached out his hand. The water did not stir, the light did not flicker, and for the first time since the oath was sworn, since the doom of Maedhros was spoken, since the Silmarils were lost and war had torn the earth apart in their name, Maedhros' hand hovered before the fire of his father's making. Without certainty, without need, without hunger. And in that moment, Aranon understood. The Silmaril had never been meant to be taken, not by Morgoth, not by Fëanor, not by kings or warriors, nor by those who sought them in grief or rage or hope. They were not things to be possessed, to be carried as tokens of victory or loss, as proof of right or claim. They were light. They were fire. They were not meant to be held. Maedhros' fingers trembled, his palm hovering just above the Silmaril, close enough that its glow bathed his flesh in silver, close enough that he could feel its warmth. Not burning, not rejecting, but simply there, waiting, waiting as it always had. And then his hand closed, not upon the jewel, not upon the fire, upon nothing, upon empty water. And Maedhros, who had sworn the unbreakable oath, who had followed it through blood and ruin, through war and sorrow, through fire and darkness, let his fingers uncurl, let his hand fall away, let the light remain where it was. And the Silmaril did not fade, it burned still. It burned because it was meant to. Maedhros turned then, his gaze meeting Aranon, and in his face there was something unreadable, something that was neither joy nor sorrow, but something that had never been there before, something like peace. "Let it be," he murmured, and his voice was not filled with regret, nor with yearning, nor even with farewell, only with acceptance. And as they turned away, as they left the Silmaril where it lay, the sea began to move again. Not in anger, not in rejection, but in release. The current stirred, the hush began to fade, and the weight of the deep which had held them so carefully, so gently, now began to lift, to bear them upward, back toward the world they had left behind. And in the darkness below, the light of the Silmaril remained gleaming in the deep, as it had for all these long years, untouched, unclaimed, not lost, but simply waiting. The sea did not forget, but it did not hold, it let them go. And as they rose, carried upon the breath of the tide, neither Maedhros nor Aranon looked back. There was no need. The Sil would burn forever. The sea carried them upward, lifting them upon the slow, steady breath of the deep, as though the very waters that had guided them down now sought to return them to the world above. Not with force, not with urgency, but with a quiet inevitability, a gentle, knowing release. There was no rush, no sudden upheaval, no struggle against the weight of the abyss. It was not the expulsion of unworthy trespassers, nor the rejection of those who had come seeking what was not theirs to take. It was something softer, something deeper, an understanding. The ocean, ancient and endless, had tested them, had watched them, had measured the weight of their hearts against the burden of history, and now, satisfied, it let them go. Not as victors, not as conquerors, but as those who had come to listen, to see, and to leave unchanged. The light of the Silmaril faded beneath them, not because it had dimmed, not because it had disappeared, but because it did not need to be looked upon to be known. It remained deep in the heart of the sea, untouched, unclaimed, not lost, but waiting as it had always waited. And Maedhros, who had spent his life in pursuit of that light, who had followed it across battlefields and bloodshed, who had burned beneath the fire of his own oath, did not reach for it, did not turn his gaze downward, did not let his thoughts linger upon what might have been, upon what once was. Instead, he let it slip from his vision, let it sink from his mind like the ebbing of a tide, let it pass from his hands without regret, without grief, without the weight of longing that had once shaped every breath, every thought, every moment of his existence. And as they rose, as the darkness began to thin, as the distant gleam of the surface shimmered above them like a promise, Aranon found himself watching him. Not with questions, not with the burden of speech that sought to fill silence, but with quiet wonder. He had seen many things upon this journey, had seen the hush of forgotten ruins where the echoes of lost songs still clung to the stone, had seen the fire of memory burn in the eyes of those who carried history upon their backs like an unshakable weight, had seen the light of a thing that should have been lost, still burning in the place where the world had sought to bury it. But nothing had struck him so deeply, nothing had left such an imprint upon his spirit, as the sight of Maedhros rising now through the dark waters. Not as a man freed from chains, not as a warrior unburdened of his oath, but as something more, something quieter, something almost whole. The surface broke around them in a slow, whispering hush, the cold air wrapping itself around their forms, filling their lungs in long, steady gasps as they drifted back into the world of sky and wind, of breath and silence. The night stretched above them vast and undisturbed, the stars gleaming in their quiet watchfulness, their light undiminished by all that had come to pass beneath the sea. The moon, silver and unlinking, hung upon the horizon like an ancient sentinel, casting its glow across the rippling waves, as if bearing witness to their return, as if marking the moment where the past was left behind and something new had begun. For a long time, neither of them spoke. They simply floated there upon the slow-moving waters, upon the rhythm of something greater than themselves, feeling the vastness of the night pressing against their skin, feeling the weightlessness of what had been let go. It was Maedhros who moved first, turning toward the distant shore, his strokes slow, unhurried, his limbs cutting through the water with the ease of someone who had known the depths and had no fear of them. Aranon followed, his body moving with the same quiet rhythm, though his mind was restless, filled with words he did not know how to shape, with thoughts that had not yet found their form. They reached the shallows before dawn, the tide pulling at their steps as they made their way back onto the sand. The wind rising to meet them, carrying the scent of salt and earth, of something clean, something unburdened. The shore was unchanged, the rocks and driftwood scattered as they had been when they had left, the world untouched by the journey they had taken, as though it had never happened, as though the sea had swallowed not only their bodies, but the very passage of time itself. And yet something had changed. Not the land, not the sea themselves. Maedhros stood upon the sand, the water trailing in thin rivulets from his cloak, his hair heavy with brine, his face unreadable in the dim light of the stars. But when he turned to Aranon, there was something in his gaze that had not been there before, something that had lingered beneath the surface of his silence, waiting for this moment, waiting for words that could not have been spoken before now. "I spent my life chasing something I had never understood," he said at last, his voice quiet, steady, as though shaping each word from something vast and unspoken. "The oath bound me, yes, but more than that, it consumed me. It was not only duty that drove me, it was the fire itself, the hunger, the certainty that I could not be whole without it, and I could not be me without it. And yet the fire was never mine to take. It was never meant to be owned." He paused, looking down at his hand, the lone hand that had once held swords, that had once sought to grasp what could not be grasped. Slowly he closed his fingers, then opened them again, as if testing the weight of something that was no longer there. "I have carried this burden for so long," he murmured, his voice barely more than a whisper now. "And yet for the first time, I think I do not know what it is to be without it." Aranon stepped closer, his own voice soft but certain. "Perhaps that is because you were never meant to be without it," he said. "Not as a chain, not as a weight, but as a memory, as something that has shaped you, but that does not define you. You are not what you have lost, nor what you have sought. You are what you are here, now, standing beneath the sky unbound. That is not an absence. That is a beginning." Maedhros looked at him then, truly looked at him. And for the first time there was something in his gaze that was neither fire nor shadow, neither longing nor grief. There was something like understanding, something like peace. The tide whispered behind them, moving in its endless rhythm, carrying away the footprints they had left upon the sand, as if to say that this moment too would pass, that all things must pass, that nothing, neither sorrow nor longing nor even light itself, could remain unchanged. And yet the stars above did not fade, the wind did not still, the fire did not die. The Silmaril burned still deep beneath the sea, and Maedhros for the first time did not need to follow. The night stretched onward, and the road ahead was open. They did not look back. The path between the world became open to them. He headed left, shock left. There was no need. The past had been left behind, and the world awaited that.